Hello, hello.
Hi, Mark.
Hello.
Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from.
Hello, nice to see you.
Hello, Igor. How are you? So we're just going to give it another minute or two, maybe. There should be a couple more people joining, and then we'll kick it off. Did you have a chance to download the slides?
Yeah.
You want to take some notes, or let me just put I'll put the link again in the chat here. So if somebody still wants to download them, and should you have downloaded the previous version, this is an update. Also, what we're going to do today. So you might want to have a look at that. Yeah, so hello again to those who just joined us. We're just going to give it another minute or two for everybody to come in, and just put the link to the slides in the chat. So in case you haven't downloaded them yet, you can still do so. And while we're waiting, you might also want to just put in the chat where you're joining us from, what you do in life. Just feel free to share as much or as little as you want to. So I'm currently at home in Luxembourg. Very rainy, stormy today. We've got lots of rain, lots of wind. You might even hear some of it in the background. I'm here from Dubai. Good evening. I was in Dubai last week.
Oh, you kept that quiet?
Yeah, it was vacation actually, so it was a little bit of work,
Okay.
but mostly vacation. So my wife came along and
If I knew I could arrange a meetup next time.
enjoyed the good weather, right?
Yeah. It's the holiday season, right?
Yeah, it's really nice now. Right? Really, really good. Yeah, Angel, a bit warmer than Luxembourg. Yeah, Luxembourg is, yeah, as I say, it's not that cold, but it's really rainy. Right? So.
We know here in the Basque Country, we know about, a lot of other rain. So
Yeah, right. You have plenty of
that.
that.
It is maybe one of the regions where it's raining more.
Yeah.
Well, due to the climate change, it's not so much now, but traditionally we are very used to live the winter time with a lot of water somehow.
Yeah. Did you not have any of the flooding a couple of weeks ago? No.
No, the flooding was in Valencia, not here in the
so
northern coast. No, it wasn't there. Yeah. So we had a big flooding event in '83 here in the region. It was similar to the catastrophe in Valencia, but so we know pretty well what a catastrophe like this means, because it was really impacting event. Yeah.
Yeah, so who else do we have? Yeah, in Chicago, Laurent, Paris, Stefan from Frankfurt, hello.
Hello.
Bijou from India. Good, so I think let's get started. There might be still some people joining us, but let's go ahead. Let me just put up the slides here, share the screen. Do you see my slides all right? Yeah, great, good. So yeah, welcome to our Better Strategy Intensive. So yeah, if you haven't done so yet, just to get us started, if you want to share who you are, where you're from, what you do in life, just keep putting it into the chat. Just tell us a little bit about your role, maybe, so just to give people some background. And then, yeah, thanks for being here. Congratulations for making it into the session, and also thanks for the trust and the interest that you have in the topic of strategy. Now, just to give you a brief overview of what we are going to do in the next 2 days, and also maybe give you a little bit of my approach to strategy, again, to set some context. I know that many of you follow me on LinkedIn, but I think it's always good to just talk about it and establish maybe a little bit more of context. Now, my aim is actually to provide you really with rigorous and at the same time practical knowledge about how to do strategy. So that's really going to be about sound frameworks that are based on rigorous, on the one hand, theory, but also that have proven quite valuable in practice, in my practice, working with my clients, but also with discussions that I have with lots of other people around what is really making strategy effective, what is making it possible to actually develop good strategy. And something that I want to highlight is that, you know, on LinkedIn, there are lots of people who they try to reinvent strategy, you know, find different or alternative explanations to actually well-known phenomenon, and they want to, just reinvent strategy. And that's actually not me. So although I question a lot this idea of old school strategy or traditional strategy, and we're going to talk about that, but I don't think it's really necessary to completely reinvent how we do strategy. We know how to do good strategy. We know what good strategy looks like. And it's really more a matter of learning these quite solid frameworks and approaches that then will help you to make it quite easy, or let's say simple rather, to develop good strategy. So it's not necessarily easy to find good answers to your strategic challenges and to your strategic questions, but it's really, with the right tools, in my experience, it can be simple in the sense of that you are very clear about what you need to do, and you're very confident that you're actually doing strategy right. So that is my goal for the next 2 days, to show you proven systems really and approaches to think about strategy and to do strategy. And obviously, I mean, you get the most out of it. The more you participate, the most present you are, you will get the most out of it. And, you know, like they say in a training, there's going to be lots of stuff. So I'm going to be showing you quite a lot of stuff. So the pace is also going to be quite fast, I believe. And not every idea might resonate at first, or not everything might even be relevant for you in your particular situation, in your particular context at the moment. And that's totally okay, right? So think about it like a candy store. You know, there's lots of stuff on display, and if you eat from everything, you're going to be sick. So here's the same thing. Just pick what is most valuable to you, what is most helpful for you in the situation that you're in. How does that sound? Good?
Good. Thumbs up.
Yeah? Okay. Now, just a little bit of context from my side. So I've been doing this strategy work for over 20 years now. I actually started off more on the education and training side, so doing leadership development. And then from there, I moved to strategy execution, lots of change management, a lot of organizational transformation. And that's where I also kind of started to notice that, you know, very often organizations or managers, people in organizations are asked to implement strategies, but the strategies were not really good in the first place, which actually then makes it quite hard to really implement these strategies. Which then also, I mean, it led to, even when we talk about implementation, there was always, or very often, still a lot of development and design of strategy that had to be done, which then also led me more towards working with leadership teams on developing strategies, designing better strategies. Along the way, so I also learned, I mean, everything you learn about in business school doesn't necessarily work, and we're going to get back to that. And I wanted to see how successful companies actually really do strategy, with a particular emphasis also on new growth strategies and through business model innovation, strategic innovation. So along the way, I got a DBA, a PhD from Manchester Business School, which turned into a couple of books that you see here, and that we're also going to be talking about some of these concepts. For most of my working life, I've been independent or self-employed, always working in a larger network with other consultants, but really, being independent. Apart from actually a couple of years where I was director of innovation at Deloitte in Europe. So, but mostly really being independent and always working with the goal of making organizations more successful. Now, just to give you a little bit of context, so here was a couple of companies that I've worked with in the last 18 to 24 months. Now, I know that most of you are small and medium companies, and the training is actually, the masterclass here is actually more for small and medium companies. So don't be kind of, I don't know, afraid if you see these big companies here. You know, at the end of the day, the big companies is really just they are really made up of smaller companies, right? You have smaller entities, you have business units, divisions, you have country organizations, and this is actually the level where most of the action, I would say, when it comes to strategy happens. Right? So one customer here, for example, Danfoss, it's a Danish engineering company. I think meanwhile, they have about 40,000 people. They're making a couple billion, I think it was like 10 billion last time I checked in revenues. But at the end of the day, the companies that I worked with within the Danfoss group, they ranged between, I think the smallest one was 100, an independent standalone company, as they called it, 100 to maybe 4,000, 5,000 people. So you see that even though these large organizations, they are made up of smaller units. So at the end of the day, what I want to assure you is that the stuff we're going to be talking about, it applies no matter the size of your organizational unit. It matters no matter whether you are an independent standalone organization or whether you are part of a larger group. The strategic questions that you have to ask yourself and the paths to explore for answers, they will always be the same. So even if you're not a big company, strategy is not really that different in these contexts. And I'll share a couple of examples to show my point. Now, what did I learn along these years of doing strategy? Now, the first is what I call here, business school strategy doesn't work. And if I say business school strategy, what do I mean? Well, you know, I don't know about you, and maybe you can also share some of your experience, but when I learned strategy in business school, it was very heavy on analytics. And in fact, I just picked up one of the books that we had at business school. So it's quite a volume. It has some 550 pages. And as you can see, the title is Strategic Analysis. So that's the kind of stuff you learn when you really learn, at least in business school, about strategy. It's a lot about analysis. Unfortunately, doing the analysis, it doesn't really lead to, or it doesn't automatically lead, let's say, to good strategy or even any strategy at all. One of the companies that I've worked with recently, it's a hospital or hospital group or private hospital group, and they had a traditional consultant specialized in the industry, and the consultant produced a couple hundred slides. And what they actually did was they started off with a SWOT analysis, which, I mean, if you learn about business strategy or strategy in business school, it's a sensible thing to do a SWOT analysis. And what they then did is, so they had the strengths and they tried to map strengths to opportunities, map strengths to how to overcome the threats. You know how that works. And they came up with 8 scenarios. So, and then they took dozens of slides to explain these 8 scenarios, only to come to the conclusion that none of these 8 will actually work, and that they introduced a 9th one, which would be better. So a practical example to illustrate that this idea of we do an analysis and then somehow magically we come to scenarios and strategies, it doesn't really work that way. Which also brings me to the point that strategy, I mean, it's not that linear. So it's not, in real life, it's not this, first we do the analysis, then we design the strategy, then we do the strategy, then we plan the implementation, and then we go for execution. It's a lot more back and forth. It's a lot more actually as a puzzle. So I think about strategy more as a puzzle than as a linear process. The other one here, planning is not a strategy. We're going to talk more about that. I mean, Roger Martin made that quite famous. You might have seen the video. A plan is not a strategy, which is quite famous. He made that idea very popular. It's not a new idea, though. You know, Henry Mintzberg talked about strategic planning not being strategic thinking already like 40 years ago. There's a famous Harvard Business Review article, which is called The Rise and Fall of Strategic Planning, which is actually from 1984. So this idea that planning is not strategy is not new, but still lots of companies actually do that. And finally, you know, we always look at strategy as dense documents and lots of pages and slides, but a good strategy can be really simple. And just to illustrate that point, so here is a strategy summary. This is a customer of mine, and actually, again, to give you some context, the story is that the company was not doing quite well. It is a 200-person organization. Again, it's part of a group, and because it was not doing well, the group sent the management consultants to this company. They had been very successful over the past 10 years. They have had grown a lot, but despite now having hundreds of customers, they weren't really profitable. And so this traditional consultant came in and they produced this as a strategy. So if you look at this, what do you say? What is your reaction to this? Just feel free to open your mic and drop a comment. You can also put it in the chat if you prefer.
Looks simple and focused.
This is simple and focused, you say, or?
I'd say there's too many priorities here, right?
Yeah.
There's quite a lot here. But
That's
I have
quite a
something.
lot.
I was going to say I have something that looks very similar and probably less similar. I know.
Yeah, most companies actually do, right? So,
Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah,
me, it
my
looks-
problem.
So sorry. Please
Oh,
go ahead.
sorry. I was gonna say I can't tell looking at this what's like a pebble, what's like a molehill or a mountain. Like I can't understand the overall impact. Even with
Right.
those little circles, I'm still not sure how to prioritize hierarchical
Right.
approach looking at this. It's difficult.
Right. So I mean, the only prioritization you see here is the tick boxes at the back, right? Where they say we're going to do everything apart one thing. So they said that M&A is not really an option, but everything else, it's not really prioritized, right? They say we're going to do, or we need to do all of these things, or at least that's what the consultant said. Right?
Yeah,
Stefan,
Mark, for me, it looks like a very rational mental grid, but it doesn't show any trade-off decisions. It doesn't show any circumstance how to execute. It doesn't touch me emotionally, so it's no motivation included for what do I strive for.
Right. That's still another very important part, man.
There's no picture in my mind now. It's just a working grid.
Exactly. So, but this is the result of the traditional strategy that we see very often. I mean, this is a reputable strategic management consultancy, right? So, I mean, they produce these things. And yeah, so just a couple of thoughts here. I mean, if you look at the slide number, it's 110. And this is actually the first slide of where they talk about the strategy. So you have 100 pages of analysis that come before they come to, and here is the strategy. And the whole deck had 150 pages. So maybe two-thirds of the deck is analysis, what I was just talking about before. They have identified the challenges, so I like that. We're going to talk more about this idea of strategy should focus on challenges. Then, as some of you said, unfortunately, they did not prioritize these challenges. And then they come up with, a lot of measures. So this is what Roger Martin says means when he says a plan is not a strategy. So here we have a plan. We have 15 different things. Some of them are smaller, some of them are quite large that should be done. But it's not, like Yaa said, it's not really coherent. It's not really clear what is actually the strategy here. Right? And so the client had tried to implement some of these things. They had some success, like with organizing sales. So that is something they had done, and that worked quite well. And actually, that had also led to more sales. So they had become better at sales, more efficient processes. But it really didn't solve the challenge that they had too many customers, actually. They had too many products. They were all over the place. They didn't really know where to focus. The organization was overwhelmed. And at the end of the day, despite they were growing the business, they were losing more and more in terms of profitability because the business was more and more complex. They didn't even know what kind of customers and products were profitable, or the profitability of different kinds of products and customers. So overall, I mean, the whole organization and management was confused and overwhelmed and not clear where to focus. And actually, they also lost confidence in that this is going to lead to success. So then they wanted to work on the strategy. The CEO reached out to me and they wanted to keep strategy actually in-house. So they said, we believe that we can do this. We don't need a done-for-you consultant, as I always say, telling us what the strategy should be, but we need somebody who guides us through the process, who helps us structure our thinking. And that's the stuff that we're going to talk about today and tomorrow, is really how to structure your thinking so that you avoid this kind of all over the place kind of strategy, if you like, and also the steps that you need to take. And just to show you this, the point I made earlier, strategy can be simple. This is the core of the strategy that we came up with for this company. So the core idea was, we called it here media as a service, was kind of like the tagline. So it's a broadcasting company. They are in the media industry. And the goal was, or the ambition was, to be a one-stop shop for new medium-sized broadcasting clients. So a clear focus on who is the ideal customer. As it says here, medium-sized customers who don't have a broadcasting experience. And we want to offer a standard out-of-the-box integrated solution and managed services really covering all their needs. So if you compare these two, any comments, any thoughts? Don't be shy.
I'd say just one comment here. I think this is definitely more focused, right? We can see that, but there is an argument that there are two different versions that are suited to different audiences, right? And they achieve very different goals.
Yeah. I mean, so obviously here there is a lot more detail to this, right? So afterwards, we're going to talk about it. I'll use this case a couple of times, especially tomorrow when we talk about business level strategy. I'm going to talk more about the details. But my point here is that, you know, it's very focused and it's very clear what you need to do. I mean, for the organization, you're lacking context, obviously, but if you know the context, it's very clear afterwards for the organization who are the customers we go after. I will specify that in more detail. And it was very clear for the organization what should we focus on in terms of products and services. Right? And there was discussion, there is still discussion actually to detail that, to be more granular about what does it mean and all of that. But the focus and the core of the strategic idea here is very clear. We have a very clear customer group that we go after, and we have a very clear solution or offering ecosystem, actually, this media as a service that we want to go after. And it made it possible for the organization then in the years after to really focus all their efforts and the resources on this ambition. Whereas here, it's not very clear where you should focus. There are no priorities. And here, the priorities are very clear. Again, I'm going to talk more about it. I'm going to tell you more about it. I mean, but here is the core idea. Just to illustrate that the core idea of the strategy doesn't have to be very difficult. Right?
Mark,
yeah?
Mark, this is Ravi. Yeah. It's very neat, clean, very focused, gives you kind of a what to do next thing. But this also is a result of, I'm sure, lots of discussion and lots of deliberation, right?
Yeah, so actually we did, so with this particular company, we had so we put the management team together. So there were 9 people, so the executive and then the next level. So the overall organization, as I said, is like 200 people. And this core idea actually came up in the second workshop. So we had a total of 4 workshops of 2 days. And in the second workshop, we had the core idea, and then the other workshops, we used them to be more granular, to detail it, what does it mean? And then actually the last workshop was to plan out how are we going to go about execution. So it is not really, also from an effort point of view, it was not really that much, right? So in 8 days, if you like, the strategy was done, and this core idea, it came up in the second workshop. So after like 2 days or 3 days of discussion in total.
Okay, nice.
Mark, another thing which is for me relevant is that it's very much focused on customers and value proposition, which is not the case of the previous one. Just what is missing? What is missing in this, let's say, bunch of sentences and ticks and so on is what is about the customers? What is the key issue about the customers and the value proposal the company is offering? And what is the positioning of the company regarding this value proposal? I think here the idea, what I perceive is that it is more clear that at least there is an ambition to progress or to, let's say, develop a value proposal for the customers.
Yeah, right. Relevant. Exactly. So it was, so when we discussed, we had different different opportunities actually that we discussed here in these workshops, and there were some opportunities around who is an ideal customer. There were opportunities around what markets should we go into, and there were opportunities more from a product perspective. So we had post-its and flip charts on the wall with lists of these 3 different types of opportunities. And then throughout the discussion, this is how we focused. And it was actually based on the key insight that the CEO actually had when we were having all these discussions. Well, we're going to come back to this. I just wanted to set here the context a little bit to show you some of the problems with that traditional strategic analysis or traditional strategic planning, and to show you that strategy could actually be something quite straightforward here. Good. Before we go any further on, I'd like to give you the chance a little bit to get to know each other and also talk about your organizations. Again, feel free to share as much or as little as you want to, but also to talk a little bit about, so what are the pains and the challenges that you face when doing strategy, when leading strategy in your organizations, or also if you're working as a consultant, maybe with other organizations. So just going to open a couple of breakout rooms here. Let's see, with around 20. So just going to do 4 breakout rooms, very random. You got 10 minutes. So if you're like five people in the group, so 2 minutes per person. So you just share a little bit, again, whatever you want to share. And then we're going to come back together, and I'm going to ask one of you from each group to just share a little bit what were the key elements, the key topics that you discussed when it came to ambitions, pains and challenges, and maybe topics that you're most interested in. Okay, you good with that? Yeah. So let me put up the breakout rooms here. And there you go. Igor, Chawat, Peter, you there or? Yeah, so if you're here, then please just click to join the breakout room. Thank you. Hi, Ferris. We're just in some breakout rooms.
Okay.
And so here was the question that people are discussing. So I'm just going to put you in a room, if that's okay with you.
Can you just give me another 15 minutes? I'll just be waiting in.
Sure.
I'll join the other one. Yes.
Okay,
I just finished the meeting.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, just come back when you're ready.
Okay. I'll be on the call. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome back.
Welcome back.
So let's hear it. What were the key topics that came up during the discussion? We start with room 1. So we had Beju, Chaivat, Natasha. Anybody wants to report out a little bit?
Yeah, so we discussed about eventually our challenges regarding, the confusion about strategy. What exactly is strategy? Because we say obviously strategy is not planning, but what is exact strategy? And then we had a conversation about, the challenge of some of us have always been in execution and now they have to do strategy, so how to go about it. And some of us shared that they have been doing strategy work before, and the most exciting part about strategy was the part where we diverge and get outside in thinking before converging into solutions. And also we discussed about so what are the tools that we are using to do strategy, and the answer was a diversity of tools, and the tools as and when, depending on the business challenge to solve actually, and the context.
Okay, cool, good, thank you.
Pleasure.
How about room number 2? So we had Igor, Peter, Ravi, Walter, Jan.
Yeah, so we had an interesting set of people here. Each one has a different look at the topics. The first one, I think Peter was talking about the entire organization being very short-term thinking, 6 months to 1 year, because it's a family-owned business, and that needs to change. His challenge is to make it more long-term actual strategy. Walter came up with the thing that there are only 10% of the entire about 40 workforce growing sales. Only 10% are very focused on the value generated for the customer and thinking about strategic roadmap for the customers, and the others are not. So all of them have to be moved towards that thinking. So how do we do that? Ja, I hope I got the spelling right, but Ja has a very typical challenge of a digital transformation, print to digital, and I think that's a huge challenge. And then Igor has a monopoly, runs a monopoly business in the energy sector. One of the serious challenges is it's slow in terms of moving up, taking up challenges, as well as, of course, the energy challenge in the world itself.
Okay.
So,
well, it's nice to be in a monopoly position, though, right?
I know. We said the same thing, but then he looks like he doesn't agree.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. How about
if I can take 10 seconds more.
Yeah,
I
sure.
didn't get my thing over there. I thought I'll put it up here so that we can discuss it sometime. I help companies set up their captive innovation centers in India.
Okay.
And the challenge is the workforce in India, which is already leading organizations, is a very services cost-centered mindset, whereas the organizations which are setting up captive organizations are looking for innovation centers which take up ownership and grow the business as a international company. So moving from the cost to the innovation or independent organization thinking, the strategy is completely different, and need to educate management here.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you for the time.
So room number 3. Eta, Laurent, Mika, Rocher.
So a few words. We had some discussion about what is a good and bad strategy.
Yeah. Did you come to a conclusion or?
No, because that's the reason we are here. I think so.
Okay.
and it will resonate for each of us. We had also a discussion between strategy and execution. Why we about the failure between strategy and execution, and we had also discussion about agility on to tackle the strategic topic.
Okay. Yeah. Good. And then finally, room number 4, Aldo, Angel, Stefan.
They went home.
No.
Stefan.
I'll give it a start. Please comment. So totally different setup, very international perspectives included from Asia, from Europe, from UAE. Different topics, therefore, because different chances or challenges. Either you work in mature industries like automotive, one colleague of us, or as I do in a startup where you're acting customer focused and data driven. So then strategy execution is different, of course. One is looking for the new way into the future, being faced by disruption. The other one is like me scaling for future growth. So totally different. Or the other part, as far as I can comment, it's like how to build up a good education in Asia, in Singapore, for example, or in other countries, and scale people. So it was really totally different what we have only shortly discussed. So it might be value added. We all bring in different perspectives from different international backgrounds.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's how, I mean, different, an interesting question, whether different situations require different approaches to strategy.
Yeah.
I mean, the strategy might be different, but is the approach that you take actually a different one? Right?
Yeah.
There was an interesting book there by some colleagues from BCG about this. It's called Your Strategy Needs a Strategy. So where they look a little bit about, or they look into the dynamics of the environment and how much you as a company can actually shape that environment. Yeah. And then as a result, they have different approaches to strategy. So here, for example, we would say, if you are in a very stable environment and it's very predictable, then strategic planning might be a better option because, I mean, you are pretty sure what needs to happen, but if it's more dynamic, obviously, then you need a more agile, innovative approach, maybe. Okay, cool. Now, yeah, so a lot of good topics, and we're going to cover actually most of that during today and tomorrow. Some things with a little bit more in depth and some things a little bit lighter, but I'm pretty sure that, yeah, pretty confident that we're going to touch upon most of the stuff and the questions that you mentioned. Good. So let me go back to the slides. So here is the agenda. So in a little bit more detail, very quickly again, strategy crisis. Again, what is making strategy so difficult today in organizations? So I talked about the business school strategy aspect, but there might be other things, right? And then the bulk of our time today and tomorrow is really making better strategy. So
no, you're good. I have the headphones in. Hey.
Going through that structured framework to do strategy. So very much on a content perspective, but we're also going to talk about the process of doing strategy, how to design it, how to track it, update it, and so on and so forth. And then to close it off, we're going to really talk about, again, as a summary more, is it a good strategy? Is it a bad strategy? What is good? What is bad? And how can you kind of evaluate a little bit whether what you have is actually a strategy at all? It's a good strategy, and it might even have the potential of being a winning strategy. How does that sound? Good? Yeah? Okay.
Perfect.
So let's talk a little bit about this old school strategy, as I call it. So here's the problem. I mean, no matter what kind of research you look into, there are lots of different studies. This one is one from Strategy And, so it is from a consulting company, but they have data on thousands of leaders, and this is kind of the conclusion what these leaders say about strategy. So they are very concerned about the company's strategy and also the ability of the company to execute the strategy. And the big problems that 70% of these leaders here, roughly 70 to 80, identify is that, first of all, the strategy is not clear enough. So if you look at something like the first slide that I showed you earlier, right, it's kind of understandable. Not meaningful, differentiated from competitors. So too much me too, not bold enough, kind of goes hand in hand. And then when it comes to execution, well, not allocated sufficient resources, not really translated strategy into tangible actions. So really that, and we're going to talk about that tomorrow, how to make really the link between what the organization does and your strategy. And then finally, the strategy asks them to work on too many priorities. So again, looking at a slide like the one I showed you before with these 15 different initiatives, that's just too much stuff and it's not really clear what you should be focusing on. Now, all these things lead really to catastrophic results. So again, various studies, depending on what study you look at, but the range is somewhere 70 to 90% of strategies actually fail. So they don't get implemented, or when they get implemented, they don't work, which obviously, I mean, if you look at all the time and effort and the money very often that is spent on developing these strategies, it's not really a good result. I think the most prominent example of recent years probably of a failed strategy is CNN Plus. Have you come across that? So CNN wanted to launch a streaming service called CNN Plus. They had McKinsey as a consultant, and they shut it down again after 3 months and having lost $300 million because it didn't work. So they had a strategy, they implemented it, but customers were just not interested in what they had to offer, and The strategy failed, cost them 300 million. So that's an example of, executed, but it didn't really work. Now, again, in my experience and also in the research, if you like, in the studies, there are three big reasons to why this happens. And you mentioned already one of them at least. So this is this idea of, so what is strategy, or what is good strategy really? And here is a quote that a CEO of a publicly traded company once, he told me, so even as a CEO, this was a bigger US company, he said, even as a CEO, I don't really know what strategy is. I don't really have a clear idea when we say we do strategy, we talk about strategy, we think about strategy. What is it actually that we think about? And statements like these that I kept on getting also led me to looking into this stuff that we're going to talk about today and tomorrow, how to structurally, or how to have a structured framework for thinking about strategy. Second element here is most leaders are not very good at doing strategy. So here, the people in the organization actually would ask to rate their leaders on how good are they at developing strategy and how good are they at executing strategy. And as you can see, only 8% were really good at both. About a third is really bad at both. And then you have some, like only 1% good at development, but bad at execution. Only 1% good at execution, but bad at development. And only 8% really being good at both things. So I think there's lots of room for improvement here to enhance your strategic thinking and kind of move towards those 8% or increase the 8% number in your organization also. And one of the things here is also what Richard Rummelt, he has been very outspoken about, that is the idea that, you know, all of this, not knowing what strategy is, not knowing how to do good strategy actually leads to organizations doing many things that they call strategy, but it's not really strategy. And Rummelt actually says that the bad strategy is not really the absence of strategy, but it's calling something that is a strategy what is really not. So again, we go back to this idea of the plan is not a strategy, just having a financial forecast, the objectives is not a strategy, all these things, but organizations do these things, they do planning and they call it strategy. And this kind of also reinforces this idea here. This is from Bain, where they did a study and they said, well, so most of CEOs that we ask, they agree that 97% of strategic planning are actually a waste of time and effort in the organization. So again, we do all these things, but whether they are really valuable is questionable. And all this is a shame, really, because if we look at serious academic research, then there is good evidence and proof that strategy actually leads to better results. So there is good proof in the research that the positive relationship, they call it here, between formal strategic management and firm performance. So really the idea of having a formal written down strategy, it will enhance the performance of your company. And some people even say just the fact of having it. So in some research, it was not really about is it a good strategy or bad strategy, but comparing peers in an industry, those companies who did not have a strategy and those who had a strategy, were doing up to 30% better in terms of sales profitability than those who had no written down formal strategy. So just having a strategy, writing it down in a formal way is going to, according to this research, improve your performance. Also, interestingly, very often we hear, especially in these days, you know, the environment is turbulent, it's unpredictable, VUCA and what have you. Is it really worth doing a strategy? And again, the research says that the link between having a strategy and performance is even stronger in highly turbulent environments. So the more turbulent your environment, the more advantages or the more benefits you actually have from having a strategy. And also quite interestingly, again, for most of you probably in small and medium companies, this link between a strategy and the performance impact is actually higher in smaller companies than in the big corporates. Some of that, in my opinion, has to do with, you know, at big corporates, again, it's smaller companies, so the action is really there. So it depends on what kind of level you look at. But it's just the fact that in a smaller company or a medium-sized company, you can't just have a bigger impact with having a clear and well-formulated strategy.
So, Mark, what's an example of environmentally turbulent?
Well, if your environment is very unstable, lots of changes, Currently, you might say energy is still a little bit shaky in Europe, for at least. Maybe the US now. I'm not sure about the impact of the elections, so that might be a more turbulent environment.
Sure.
Stuff where you have lots of changes. So if there is rapid technology development, for example, so that might also be a more turbulent environment. Usually also industries that kind of are a little bit new, I would say. So where the market leaders is not yet clear and there's lots of changes going on, lots of dynamics going on. So all these would be examples of turbulent environments.
Mark, one idea behind this is also the complexity idea, because it's at the end of the day, these turbulent times is a situation where you can't make predictions based on, you can't correlate cause and effect, which
Yes.
was, this is the traditional concern, which is arising in turbulent times. Where,
Yeah, so that's part of the VUCA argument, right?
it's part of this.
It's too, first of all, it's ambiguous, so you don't know, is it left or is it right? Where is it going? And as you said, it's too complex to be clear about what is causing what, right, really.
Yeah.
But again, so in these environments, so often the argument is because of that, it doesn't pay to have a strategy, but the research says otherwise, right? The research says, especially in such an environment, it pays to have a strategy. Also because you avoid a lot going left, right, chasing after every opportunity, but you have a clear focus on what you need to do and where you need to go.
One short question, please.
Yeah.
You mentioned Richard Rulmet. If I'm not wrong, he said if you don't have a competition, you don't need a strategy.
Yeah.
I work for as I said, the monopolist company, and we cover the market 98%. But we need a strategy, very strong.
Yeah, we're gonna come to that, Igor. We're gonna talk about rather than the idea of challenge-based strategy. And I have a slightly different idea on when you actually need a strategy and when not. Just to conclude this element of good strategy. So here are some of the results that I have seen with my clients. So in some cases, we had new growth by up to 50% in 12 months, improved bottom line, obviously. Then you have all the customer satisfaction, more engaged employees because of that focused strategy, also because of involving the people in the strategy. And all of that led the organization to be more focused, more aligned, and everybody, including leadership, being more clear and having a better, more confidence in what they were actually about to do. So much for a short, again, some arguments of why it might be worth thinking about strategy. Now, how to make better strategy? So what is the system behind? Now, my approach is that, or I say you need three pillars of this, what I call the better strategy US. There is a lot of confusion out there. And again, some of you mentioned it when you had your discussions about what really strategy is and how to do it. So to counter that, here are three things you need. You need a clear definition of what strategy is. I mean, usually if you ask 5 people in your organization, you're probably going to have 6 answers, or 6 different definitions. And obviously that's not helping if you have a discussion around strategy. It also doesn't help if strategy, what you mean by strategy changes every time you talk about business strategy, HR strategy, marketing strategy, cybersecurity strategy, what have you, right? If you always have to change what it is that you're talking about and re-explain that, obviously it doesn't really help, right? So you need a clear definition. Next, you have a structured framework for thinking about strategy, which is really going to help you focus on the key questions that you have to ask yourself. A structured framework also will offer you paths that you need to explore or can explore to think about. And it will help you and your team really to move ahead with a strategy a lot faster because you avoid a lot of unnecessary discussions and you really can focus on what matters. And then finally, obviously, you need a systematic process for doing strategy. So this is designing strategy, activating strategy, implementing your strategy, living your strategy really on a daily basis, tracking it, reviewing it, updating it, and so on and so forth. So we're going to talk more about that tomorrow. But my view is that we should forget talking about executing or cascading a strategy. It's really about living your strategy on a daily basis. That's important. Now, what I'd like to invite you to do a little assessment of your strategy practice in your organization. And think about, so how clear, do you have a clear definition that is shared across the organization or not? If not, then it's a red. If you say, yeah, we kind of have a definition, not everybody might agree, that might be something more yellow. And if you say we have 100% clear definition throughout the entire organization, that's a green. And then the same for a structured framework. So do you have a structured framework where you say, we sit down, we think about strategy, we know exactly what it is that we need to think about? That would be a green. Kind of would be a yellow, and we don't have anything like that, would be a red. Okay? And I'm just going to put up a poll here. Let me see. They changed that. I haven't done that recently. So here you can evaluate that. So you can have a 1 would be red, a 2 would be yellow, and a 3 would be green for these 3 areas. It's anonymous, so don't worry about it. Nobody's going to see your results. So you can be open. So clear definition, we see a lot of 1s here. Yes, 40. Still a couple of people need to participate. Yeah, so overall, I would say some yellow here when it comes to all 3 of them. A little bit more red when it comes to the systematic process. That's quite interesting. So we're 40% in the red, and yeah, a couple of greens where everything seems to be quite clear. Cool, good. So keep that in mind. We're also going to come back to that, share the results here, so you can also have a look at that. Just curious, those who did the green, did you do green across all 3 or just one of them?
For 2 out of 3.
2 out of 3. Okay, good. Well, that's already very good. Excellent. So we can work on the last one then.
Good.
Okay, cool. So let's start with a clear definition of strategy. And here is very easy, actually, I think, and it's I think it's a nice, a good decision, or a good definition actually, because it really works across the board. So I say strategy is the answer to the challenges you're facing in achieving your ambitions. Right? So that's the working definition that I use. I mean, it goes along the way of Rumelt. Also, Roger Martin talks about strategies about solving challenges. And if you go into the literature, this is something that actually keeps coming back. So only by doing this, by thinking about strategy like this, you're going to, in my experience, really 10x already your strategic thinking. Now, if we say challenges, it's not necessarily something negative. So I would think about challenges in a more natural, in a more neutral way. So it's really about a circumstance that requires you to reconsider whatever it is that you're doing now. So you think like, well, what we're doing now is not working, or you're thinking about the future, you see some change in customer behavior and you think, well, if you continue this way, it's not going to work. Maybe you see an opportunity, and to be able to seize that opportunity, again, you need to change what you are doing. Or obviously you might also see risks and threats. And then the question is, how can we actually overcome these things? But this is key. And going back to what Igor said earlier, so I always say that if you don't have a challenge, you don't need a strategy. Then a simple plan will do, because a plan is very clear what you need to do, and you don't need to think about a strategy. But if you have a challenge, and usually that comes with constraints, I mean, you have resource constraints, budget constraints, whatever, then you need a strategy to work with these things. And to illustrate the point, here is, I'd like to use Netflix as an example. I mean, everybody knows Netflix. Netflix has a very clear ambition. So if you go to the Netflix website, this is what they say. So they want to entertain the world, whatever your taste, no matter where you live. We give you access to best-in-class TV, documentaries, feature films, and mobile games. They are actually very clear a little bit further down on the website what they don't do. So they say, we don't do live sports, for example. We don't do porn or adult movies, for example. So they're very clear about what is it that they offer. Apple, for example, has a different strategy. They do live sports. But Netflix decided against those. So very clear what they offer. Our members control what they want to watch when, in one simple subscription. Again, different than others. Apple has multiple subscriptions. So you have a TV subscription, you have a game subscription. If you want to watch live sports, that's again a different subscription. Apple also has, you have the base subscription, but then they have premium movies as part of Apple TV. And if you want to buy or watch these movies, then you can buy them, you can rent them, but there is an additional cost. So Netflix does none of that. They say one simple subscription. So this is the ambition. So they are very clear on their strategy, if you like, what they're offering, where they do it, and how they do it. But to get there or to reach the ambition or work towards the ambition, actually keep working towards the ambition, they had to overcome lots of challenges throughout the years. Now, the first strategic challenge was really, as they were DVD, they saw an opportunity in streaming, and they needed to shift the strategy towards streaming. It's a completely different company, right? You need completely different capabilities. You need technology now. Before they had warehouses of people sitting there putting DVDs in envelopes. They don't need that anymore. But now they have warehouses of computer racks and the technology people that they need. Then, I mean, if you want to stream, you need to have the content. And the strategic challenge was, how do we get the content? The answer was, well, we're going to license it. The strategy was, we're going to license it from the large Hollywood studios. At some point, that became more difficult because there was new entrants. So there was Hulu in the US, Apple TV, Amazon, and also the studios. They saw that, well, streaming is a good business. So some of them launched their own streaming services, and you actually can't have their content in Netflix. Like HBO was a prime example for Warner Bros. And stuff like Game of Thrones. You can only watch it on HBO. You can't watch it on Netflix, you can't watch it on Amazon, you can't watch it on Apple. So they're not licensing the content. So challenge, how do we get the content? And Netflix started producing its own content. House of Cards was the first big blockbuster content that was produced completely by Netflix. Now, next challenge, producing its own content becomes expensive. And actually Netflix was at some point of the brink of bankruptcy, or they had cash flow problems because they were producing all these blockbusters, lots of cash out, but the growth in subscribers didn't align or didn't catch up as quickly. So producing their own content became expensive. They were still dependent on these studios, and also with the global expansion, global audiences, they wanted to have more localized content. So what did they do? Well, instead of doing these blockbuster content productions, they started to finance, license, and distribute more independent local productions. Like, I'm from Luxembourg, and there are 2 Luxembourgish TV series that you actually can do you can watch them on Netflix, but Netflix just licensed them after they were done and now distribute them worldwide. And then in the last move, you might say, how to differentiate further from competitors, they added mobile games to their subscription. So you see how strategy really is fine-tuning your where to play, how to win, if you like, or in this case, the how to win really to the challenges that you're facing. Other companies have reacted in different ways, like Amazon. So for the licensing, well, they just bought a studio. They bought MGM, they got the whole catalog of MGM. So that was their reaction to content becoming more difficult to license. They just bought a studio. So it was a different strategy to the same strategic challenge, if you like. Now, some people might say that, well, is this not too reactive? It depends a little bit on how you look at it, right? I mean, the ambition is still clear. Here's an example from Apple. So you could say, well, is this reactive? No, they had a vision. They had an ambition to create spatial computing, the Vision Pro glasses. And they actually say that it's a result of decades of experience designing all these different bits and pieces that they needed to be able to do the glasses, the Vision Pro, right? So they were developing. The challenge was, we need a display, so they developed a lot of that. The challenge was sound. They acquired Beats to get these capabilities. The challenge was the chip, and the strategy was actually to develop their own chip and not partner with NVIDIA or AMD or Intel or whatever. And they actually, so the chip has the life cycle of the chip. The M1 was first in the MacBooks, and then in the iPad, and then only the M2 was good enough to put it into the glasses. So you see how they had that ambition here for a product, and the strategy was really then solving the challenges along the way to get there. So in some sense, and this also goes back to this idea of long-term, short-term, Well, so modern strategy really, instead of having that long-term strategic planning, what you try doing is you define your ambition, and that could be 3-5 years out. But then, so you zoom out into the future, and then you zoom back into today, and you focus on the challenges you need to solve today that are going to bring you a step further towards your ambition. So this is how you combine also that long-term view with the short-term view. And actually you combine this idea of, well, we want to have some focus and certainty about where we want to go, but we also adapt to whatever is happening right now in our environment. So you become more flexible instead of sticking to a plan or a 5-year plan, for example. And then the question is often, how do you prioritize? And the prioritization here, I have this tool, I call it strategy triage. So 2 questions that you ask yourself: does the challenge that you're facing impact the whole organization or just a part? And will it threaten the survival of the organization or not? And then obviously it affects the whole company and it threatens the survival. Could also be an opportunity that you miss, or it's also maybe going to threaten your survival. So that's the first priority. And then threatening the survival, but only part of the organization is the second priority, and so on and so forth. So this is, if you have a long list of challenges, once you start discussing with your team, you're going to have plenty of challenges. And this is one way to kind of prioritize them and then focus on what is really the key challenge. So if you want to make it very easy, here is a simple framework to think about strategy. So you think about what is really your ambition. You think about what are the challenges on your way to that ambition, and the strategy is really how you're going to solve those challenges. And then you think about a coherent set of actions and strategic moves that will help you to execute your strategy. So this is a very generic strategy framework that works across the company. It works no matter whether you're talking marketing strategy, HR strategy, whatever, right? Business strategy. And it actually also works in your personal life. It works in politics, economics, whatever it is. This approach always works.
Mark, I have a question.
Yes, let me pause it for a second.
Laurent speaking. Could you come back on the previous slide, please? Are you making a difference between the 2 words ambition and vision?
No, not really.
It's the same for you?
Yeah, it's whatever you want to call it. Right? So I talk about ambition, and usually we want to make it very specific. And specific could mean for some companies, you need financials. Roger Martin, for example, would be very much around, he calls it winning aspiration. And he says it should not include any financial goals. It depends a lot on the company. Some companies, they just want to have financial goals, right? But it's really, so that's why I say ambition, whatever your ambition is, and I'm very indifferent to that. Whatever the company says, this is our goal, this is what we want to reach, we're going to work on that.
Okay, so because you have the kind of triangle between the mission, after the vision, strategy, and so on. That's the reason. That's what I have in mind.
Yeah, so that's also I spoke about it a little bit earlier. That's one of these also classic views where you have the thinking goes. We have mission, vision, goals, strategy, and we kind of can cascade one to the other. And in my experience, it's very much like a puzzle. You have some ambitions when you start. So for example, the ambition might be, okay, we need to grow our business. It's a very fluffy ambition, right? Then you work on the strategy. Then you might go back to the ambition and say, now we can make it more specific in terms of real goals that we have. So that's why I say it's not that linear cascade. It's always a back and forth in the discussion. And that's why I like to think about it more as a puzzle than as this linear process or this linear cascade.
Okay.
And sometimes organizations that I work with, they have a mission, they have a vision, and it's actually also good enough so that you can work with it. That's another question, right? There's lots of confusion. What is a vision? What is a mission? Right? What's our purpose? Sometimes these things are very good and they inform what we want to do in strategy, and then we can use them. Sometimes they don't really help, and we don't use them.
It's a nice short list, really. When I worked with BCG at TUI, for example, we focused on challenges and opportunities, like you said, and the quality discussion was always, is this really a strategic challenge or a strategic opportunity or a simple a current business difficult problem, something like that. So that was key. And after that, we coming then to a strategy, we linked it with strategic alternatives. So we asked us, which alternatives do you have to sort out these opportunities or get access to the opportunity or face the challenge? So that was, I like it a lot, what you do here.
Yeah, so that's also something we're going to discuss tomorrow, this idea of having strategic options. Right?
Yeah.
So you call it alternatives, I call it options. But discussing these options and having a range of options is actually going to enhance the quality of your strategy. And maybe then the final strategy is actually a combination of a couple of things from these different options. Right?
Yeah.
So that could help. But this is I think a very straightforward, easy framework. Right? And again, it works across the board, which is also something that I like about it.
Mark, a quick question about the previous slide, the grid before this. Just wondering how the two questions are different.
Well, one is the impact on the organization, and one is whether it threatens the challenge. So, as an example, if you do this, so you sit together with your leadership team and you say, so what are the challenges we have? HR might say, we do payroll on Excel and we need a computer system. So this is a challenge for HR. So it's only part of the organization and it's not really threatening the survival of your company. I guess HR could do another 6 months with doing payroll on Excel, right? But then you might have supply chain saying, we have really issues in our supply chain. We have disruption and we're not sure whether we can actually deliver the products. So this is already more threatening the survival of the organization. Right? And now the question in this case, might be, is it only part of the organization or is it the whole organization that's impacted? But it's definitely more on the threatening survival aspect. Yeah. And very often, that's another thing that I sometimes do is if there are already lots of ideas for strategic moves, so people say we should do this, we should do that, then ask about, okay, what is the challenge it's going to solve? What is the problem it's going to solve, or what is the opportunity it's going to seize? And very often they don't have an answer to that, which is also kind of, it's a pet project. It's something that marketing might want to do, but they are not very clear about why and how it should contribute to the bigger picture. So that's also a test you can do if you have already ideas for what, or people have ideas for what should be done.
Great, thanks.
Any other key comments here from this part? Any key takeaways that you have? Any maybe aha moments, something that was new to you? Don't be shy. Whoever wants, you can also put it in the chat if you like. If you don't want to, or you can also open your mic.
The framework you just presented there, Mark, is a good way of visualizing this across the organization. Like you said, there are multiple challenges. You have to articulate how you prioritize is pretty important.
Good, thank you. Yeah, that's one way to prioritize. Right? There are others we can talk about, but that's one way of doing it quite quickly.
I like the idea of having the ambition really in writing, because even if it's so many sentences, it provides somewhat clarity. So also I can imagine within the management team being responsible for designing and executing, implementing the strategy, it will help, because you can always go back to the ambition and this is stated, this is somewhat very clear, very straightforward, and then of course how to get there is then maybe the structure. But I like the idea that you have provided us with an example really in writing, like Netflix. I think it's a nice one. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a philosophical discussion. I think this: do you need the ambition first or not? Like Rumble doesn't talk about that at all. I mean, he talks about challenge-based strategy, but he doesn't talk at all about ambition. For him, it starts with a diagnosis of the challenge. You might say, so somehow implicitly there is also an ambition, right? If a company says we need to grow in North America, or the challenge is we can't grow in North America, right? So the growth is the ambition somehow. I also think that it helps to focus a lot, right? So if you're clear about the ambition, and again, in the first kind of pass, it might be as fluffy as we need to grow, right? But then as you go through it, and again, that's why I say it's more of a puzzle, as you go through it, you go back to the ambition and you become more specific about what it could really look like. So that's, again, it's not that linear kind of thinking, but there is a lot of pieces that you need to fit together, and there's a lot of going back and forth. Maybe you have a very clear ambition, you even have a good strategy, but then once you start discussing the capabilities and the resources you have, you say, ooh, we might need to scale back our ambition because with the current resources, it's not going to be possible to achieve that. So that's why you need to stay open to this back and forth.
Yeah.
Good. Now, obviously, every company has its own strategic challenges that it needs to solve, but there is also what I call a set out of foundational strategic questions that every company needs to answer. So if you're doing strategy, again, there are very specific things that you need to think about, challenges and questions that you need to answer, which brings me to this second pillar of that Better Strategy OS, is really the structured framework for thinking about generic challenges, we might call it, of strategy. And this framework is based on the idea that you have different levels of strategy, actually. So on the top level, if you think about the whole industry you're in, the question is, there's a question of network strategy. So who do you collaborate with and who do you compete with? Then within an organization, on the corporate level, on the group level, we might say, the question is, well, which businesses as a company do we actually want to be active in? And I'm going to come back to this, but keep in mind that we call it corporate strategy, but it's just as important for small and medium businesses. So although it's called corporate, it's not just for the big companies. And then within those businesses that you have, business strategy is really about, so how do we compete in these individual businesses? And then on the granular level, on the functional level, you have within a business, how do the different functions, so marketing, sales, HR, operations, and so on, how do they contribute to the business strategy? So four different levels of strategy. Each level has its specific strategic challenges and issues that you need to solve. And each level also has its specific strategic choices that you need to make. And I've seen many companies make the mistake. For example, what happens very often is confuse corporate and business level strategy. And then having discussions that are not really helpful and are confusing and don't lead to any conclusions because they are always confusing these two levels. Right? So that's something to keep in mind. So we're going to go through these a little bit more in detail. So today we're going to do network and corporate. Tomorrow we're going to do business and functional. Okay. Now, before I go on, another thing I want to say is obviously these things are interdependent. Right? Like network strategy, it might play on the corporate level, but it might also play on the business level. Obviously, whatever you decide on the corporate level, it has an impact on the business level, and what you decide on the business level is going to have an impact on the functional level. Right? So these things are linked together, but nevertheless, it pays to discuss them separately. Like going back to Danfoss, the example I gave earlier, like Danfoss on the corporate level, they have a very strong M&A strategy. So it's really based on this idea of what business should we be active in. They don't mingle too much on the business level. And actually, most of the business level strategy is the business units, they do their strategy and it gets reported up to the board, and the board kind of looks at it, challenges it a little bit, but the business units are fairly independent. There's an exception to that. I'm going to come to it as an example. But apart from that, the corporate level doesn't mingle really in the business strategy. Right? In other companies, the corporate is very active in business strategy. That's also a corporate level discussion. How active do you want to be? Now, network level, I'm going to do this fairly quickly because it's fairly easy. I mean, this is not really rocket science, but when you talk about network level strategy, there are 4 choices you need to make. You need to make a choice around who do you want to collaborate with, obviously. You need to make a choice around where and why should you collaborate. What kind of relationship do you want to have, and how are you actually going to collaborate? So that's the core choices that you have to make on a network level strategy. So who do you collaborate with? Just some paths to explore, suppliers, buyers, competitors, complementers, and then all kinds of other stakeholders like social, cultural actors, the community, media, opinion leaders, economic actors, political, regulatory actors, and for some very important like universities, research institutes, technology actors. Then when it comes to why and where to collaborate, there's always these three things. Do you collaborate on the resources? So you share resources. Do you collaborate when it comes to joint activities? Or do you collaborate even on a level of aligning positions? And I'm going to come to an example to make that a little bit clearer. So these three, also keep them in mind when we talk about corporate strategy. What kind of relationship do you want? A loose one or a very tight one? And how are you going to collaborate? So what is the legal arrangement, if you like, non-contractual, contractual, even equity-based, multilateral, bilateral? So maybe a little bit dry theory here. Here's an example. Well-known airline alliances. So airline alliances, you actually actors, it's with competitors and a little bit with complementers, you might say, because if I'm Lufthansa, I fly to the US, then I collaborate with United in the US to do the last kind of bit in the US, so I don't need to do it yourself. So it's a little bit competition, but it's also a little bit with complementers, but it's definitely so within the industry in this case. Outside the industry, Lufthansa would be an example. They collaborate with Deutsche Bahn. So you can buy your flight ticket and part of it is done by Deutsche Bahn. So that is really collaborating, having an alliance with a outside of your industry kind of player. So Deutsche Bahn is the train company in Germany. So if you go to Frankfurt Airport and you live close by, you can buy your flight ticket and it includes already the train ride to get to Frankfurt Airport, for example. And on short distances, that is becoming more and more popular, actually. And then if you do that, you get the credit for the miles, you get the credit for the status, all of that but you haven't flown, so to say. Right? So when it comes to airline alliances, I mean, they are leveraging resources. So they are leveraging IT systems, they are leveraging the routes, they are leveraging activities, also joint Miles and More program, for example, these kind of things. They are not really aligning on positions. I mean, Swiss has a very different positioning, I would argue, than even Lufthansa has a different position than Austrian Airlines. So within the group, but they also have a different positioning than maybe United. So very different positioning here. Or Singapore Airlines has a different positioning than United, but they are part of one alliance. It's a rather tight relationship because if you are in one alliance, you have to stick to the rules of the alliance. So it's tighter. You're not really free to do what you want. And you can't collaborate with others that easily. And it's contractual. It's not really equity based, but it's also multilateral. So you see how these kind of things play out there. Here's another example. So usually you would think about Daimler and BMW as competitors, wouldn't you? They compete in their cars, but when it comes to developing new technology for automated driving, they have a joint venture. So it's with a competitor. It's about resources and activities, really. It's not about the positioning of the cars. I mean, BMW still has a very different positioning of the cars than Daimler, but in this particular case, they are collaborating on resources and activities. It's pretty tight and it's contractual. A couple other examples from BMW. So here, BMW and Daimler, they invest in joint mobility services. And in China, actually, they have a joint venture when it comes to electric vehicle charging stations. So they said, we can't do this alone. We actually need to pool our resources so that we can do that. So ecosystem, network level strategy. That's pretty, I think it's pretty straightforward. Any questions to that, maybe before we go on, about network or ecosystem strategy?
This is very, this is interesting because we tend to look at ecosystem, as you said originally, deeply embedded in our business strategy. So it's really around, how we particularly play in a space. Do we either partner, do we build, or do we acquire? And the ecosystem conversation comes under the business strategy piece, but it's interesting to see it sort of elevated much higher.
Yeah, well, as I said, so there is this interdependence, right? And some of it might happen on a corporate level, and some of it might happen on the business level.
I like the idea. I would even go further. I remember a book that was called "The Network is Your Customer." That was 20 years ago, and now today we see these ecosystems arising. So the consumer or customer should and could be, of course, included here. And you see this, I think, the most modern strategic approaches, when new businesses are set up, they focus on platforms, they focus on ecosystems, they scale immediately. Like They don't stick to physical assets, and they are very open. So that's really a big difference to those old firms established. Like when you work in manufacturing, you've done that for years, or in shipping or in retail, then normally you have a very closed system established, and you don't want to be open. Here, different thinking and capabilities are needed. And I would even
you're right. I mean, obviously, with the kind of platform business models and strategies, you are by default more network oriented.
Yeah. And maybe it's even fair to say the network might even beat you. Yeah, even if you're a very successful strategic player today, there might be someone thinking about a network approach, ecosystem approach, and they will try to beat you and cannibalize you.
The DBS, so the bank, the Singapore bank, they are actually their strategy is very much going in this direction of being more of a central player in the network. So, for example, so they go beyond the services they offer. They go way beyond banking. Actually, their slogan is "Live more, bank less." So, as a bank, they say "Bank less, but live more." And in the spirit of that ambition, they integrate a lot of third-party stuff in their app, for example. So you can buy through the DBS app. You can buy, or you can order food. You can buy cinema tickets and all these things.
Great.
But DBS wants to own the platform and the ecosystem, like you said. Right? Any other questions or comments about this network level strategy? No?
So,
Andrew?
My question here is, if you are identifying network strategies, is because you have identified network challenges.
Not necessarily. So I mean,
not necessarily. So I don't understand, because it's maybe I'm not understanding one point, because it's the strategy is the answer to a challenge. So how we can fix or choose strategies when we do not have clear challenges? So,
but so here, so if you think about this example, BMW and Daimler in China. So they both have the challenge of creating a network of electric vehicle charging stations. Right? So you might say this is a business level challenge, but then the strategy was to do a joint venture together so that they can actually leverage the resources and pool them together so that they can overcome the challenge, so that they can win against Tesla, who had already more charging stations. So that's why I say, I mean, it's conceptually, it's worth thinking about it differently, because there are different questions you need to answer. But the challenge might be that the challenge you solve might be on the business level or on the corporate level.
Okay.
In this context, Mark, Tesla has opened up all its patents with relation to EV technologies, and BMW has chosen not to get into partnership with Tesla and go its own way, even if it takes more time, probably 2027 is what they're saying, to come up with its own vehicles. So what do we say?
So
is that a
strategic decision, right? Strategic decision to say we're not going to partner with, in this case, we're not going to partner with Tesla, and we're going to do it ourselves. Right? It's a strategic decision to not go that way. Right?
Okay, so only time will tell whether that's a.
I think the whole Tesla story is a very emotionally charged discussion, right? So
I know. Okay, thanks.
Good. I mean, remember, I didn't talk about that, but on Thursday we have 2 hours actually, so you can join in the morning or the afternoon for just Q&A, right? So if you have more questions, that's a good place to do that. And also, some people will watch the recording. Also, that's the place where then you can come live and answer your questions or ask your questions. Now, let's turn to corporate strategy. Now, corporate strategy, at the core of corporate strategy is, what businesses do you want to be in? So where do you want to go? And a decision you have to make, a strategic choice, is whether you want to diversify your portfolio of businesses, if you like, or if you want to build an integrated portfolio of companies where you can leverage synergies across these companies. Right? So 3 different choices you have to make. The first one is that of composition. So where do we want to be active? So what's the scope of your company, and what's the distribution? So how much emphasis do you put on which parts of your business, of your businesses, I should say? Then integration. So how much integration versus how much autonomy do you give these businesses? Also, it's a matter of degree of integration, scope, and also how are you going to do that? The mechanism of integration. I'm going to go into more details on the next slides. And then how are you going to manage these businesses? So it's a matter of control. How much control do you want to exert as a corporate parent on your businesses, and how much freedom, again, do you want to give these businesses? So that's the core strategic choices you have to make on a corporate strategy level. And as I said, although it's called corporate, it's very relevant for small and medium businesses, and I'll show you some examples there. So when it comes to composition, I mean, what businesses do we want to be in? As I said, do we want to diversify? Do we want to build an integrated company? And then again, you have a couple of paths that you can explore. So diversification it could be outside of the industry. Integration is more in the industry. I said buying competitors, more horizontal. Backwards, going into the supplier businesses, or forward, going more into the buyer businesses. And then distribution. So what is the size of these different activities? How much emphasis do you put where? And also from a corporate perspective, how do you distribute your resources and your management attention to these different businesses? Like I said earlier, Danfoss, also the corporate, the C-suite, the corporate leadership is very focused on this. And they don't give too much management attention to the different business units, but they are really more about how are we going to build the portfolio of the business. And there is some integration rather, so they have very clear topics within which they want to be active, and they actually divested stuff that is not part of that portfolio. And so they grew from, in the last 10 years, probably they grew from 20 to 40,000 people, and most of it has been through corporate level acquisition of companies that they put into the portfolio. Then, so integration. So here the question is, how much do you integrate and how much autonomy do you give the businesses? So how much do you look for synergies and how much for rather responsiveness on the business level? You also have to think about what do you want to integrate. So if you're looking for synergies, where do you think you can find them? And again, it's the three that I mentioned earlier. So you can leverage resources, you can leverage activities, and you can leverage strategic positions across your different businesses. And then how are you going to make sure that that integration happens, right? Centralization, coordination, and standardization. So again, let's stick with Danfoss. Now, Danfoss has, I think, meanwhile, 16 different business units. They have 4 divisions, but they only have one marketing and sales organization. So corporate strategy decision, we're going to leverage resources and the marketing and sales activities. We're going to centralize that in one global team, and they're going to do sales and marketing for all the businesses. That's a corporate level decision. The businesses don't have a choice. So it's really kind of, it comes top down. They have to stick with that. And this is how they decided to leverage resources and activities. They don't, or they leverage positions to some extent. It's more the operational excellence positioning. And in that case, for example, they go for a lot of standardization. So they have a team which is called the Danfoss Business System team. So whenever they buy a company, this team goes there and makes sure that manufacturing runs across the businesses according to Danfoss standards. So a lot of standardization in terms of how manufacturing is being done, but every organization has its own manufacturing capabilities, if you like. So there's no shared capabilities there. I have an example, a company I worked with, an automotive company a couple of years ago, and they were actually confusing a lot this or corporate level strategy, looking for synergies where there were none to be had. So we had lots of discussions about positioning of the businesses on the corporate level. And we're going to talk about that tomorrow, but positioning of the business is a business level discussion. And what the team failed to see for a long time is, so they wanted to share resources. They also had one marketing and sales for the 2 business units, and that made sense because the customers were always automotive customers. But they also wanted to align the positioning, and there was a lot of discussion around Are we operational excellence, or are we more customer relationship and innovation? And at the end of the day, the businesses were so different that one business was more of a commodity business, and the focus had to be on operational excellence, which means you have to have high volume so that you can produce consistent quality at a good cost. Right? And the other business was more innovation customer relationship, because it was always tailor-made what they did. So the company produces cables and harnesses for the automotive industry. The cables is a commodity. You can buy them everywhere. Quality is not too different whether you buy it from this company or that company. But then they had the harnesses that's always tailor-made. So usually what happens is, after the company has designed the car, at the very end they call you and they say, here's the space we have for the cables. You need to come up with a solution. So it's very customer oriented. You need to be invited. So the customer needs to know you so that you get an invitation to be able to come up with a solution. And then there is some innovation. And they try to leverage the manufacturing resources to do both things. And this created a lot of disruption in the manufacturing process, because they were looking for synergies where actually it was very difficult to find synergies in the resources and also in the positioning. So that happens and actually they had lots of trouble, almost bankrupt. So that happens when you confuse these levels and you're not clear on what kind of decision you want to make, and the decisions are not really very well aligned and they don't make sense. So, and then the final part here is how to manage. And this is really about more control or less control, if you like. And typically there are three types of control that a corporate can exert on the businesses. It's more financial. You only set the objectives. So we see that a lot for PE managed companies, for example. You only get the financial objectives, but then you're free to do whatever you want. Then more strategic. So it's more about doing the strategy together, or on the most granular level, the corporate parent is really involved in direct supervision of the businesses, which is then more this planning approach. So let me give you, again, let's stay with Lufthansa here, the example of Lufthansa. So Lufthansa on a corporate level, it has three different divisions. It has passenger airlines, it has aviation services, and it has business functions. And within these divisions, it has different businesses. So it has all the airlines. There are even more now that I didn't list here. They have Lufthansa Technik, which is maintenance of airplanes. They have cargo, and the LSG group, which is catering. And then they have AirPlus, which is it's a bank with a credit card actually for a Visa card that they give out. And you can do your travel expense management and everything through that. They have aviation training. Also, they train pilots, and they have Lufthansa Systems, which is IT, mostly for the group, but also for other companies. So this is corporate level strategy. Actually, Lufthansa used to be in private jets, and they went out of private jets, which was a corporate level strategy decision. And actually, if you read here, the last sentence, it says, it's kind of like the reason why they went out of private jets. Lufthansa was actually looking, or they went into private jets because they thought they would have synergies with the passenger airlines. So the thinking was our first class passengers, they want to have a private jet that takes them to Frankfurt or Munich or Zurich. And then from there on, they're going to take a first class long haul flight. So that was the thinking of why Lufthansa went into private jets. But then it turned out that 70% of these private jet flights were point to point. So they would go from Luxembourg to London, for example, and there's no long haul. And because there were no synergies with the airlines, Lufthansa went out of private jets. So they're clearly looking for synergies within the businesses, and they didn't find them, and they went out of it. And then again, going back a little bit to the network level strategy, on the business strategy aspect, they said, we're not going to operate these jets ourselves, but we're going to partner with NetJets. So NetJets was the one operating the flights, and Lufthansa was just doing the marketing and sales, if you like. Here is another example that was quite big in the news beginning of the year. BYD. So
Mark,
BYD.
If I can, sorry to interrupt you. A quick one. Lufthansa they ended the private jet, but they have introduced extremely high class seats in some of their jets.
First class.
There's one flying right now from Munich to Bangalore. And it's like almost like a small room by itself. So
Yeah, so again, so that's a decision on a business level, right? What is the positioning of Lufthansa and Swiss in this case, for example, right? What is the customer offer that you do there? But on the corporate level, well, they went out of private jets because there were no synergies with the first class passengers in their passenger airlines.
Sure. Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, don't worry. So here, BYD made, so BYD is an electric vehicle manufacturer, Chinese. And beginning of the year, they made a lot of splash in the news because they went into shipping. And so they bought ships, and lots of people said, yeah, be careful, you're diversifying your company too much. But BYD is not diversifying at all. BYD is actually building an integrated company along all the activities of its value chain. And it owns companies from the mining of the raw materials it needs to produce the batteries and the cars up to the shipping company that brings their cars from China to Europe and the US. So it's really integrating across the entire value chain of the automotive industry, of their value chain, if you like. So into backward integration, suppliers, forward integration in this sense, if you like, or next step for shipping the cars. Right? So it's not diversification, it's really an integrated strategy. And they were also answering a strategic challenge because apparently shipping containers are scarce these days, so there is a reduced capacity, and they answered that strategic challenge by saying, well, then we go into shipping and we buy the ships and operate the ships ourselves. For us, they're not doing it for other car manufacturers, but it's really just for BYD. So these were a couple of big examples. Now here is small examples. This is it's from the website, and they didn't have it in English, so it's in German. It's a Luxembourg company. It's a small company, glass company actually. So they specialize in glass. It's about 100 people, and they started off with glass. So they did windows. Well, it's kind of natural. Then they expanded into indoor glass. Still, it's glass, so you could say, well, it fits well. Then they went into accessories, still for the windows, and so on. Then they went for doors. So that's really diversifying. You're no longer in the glass business, but now you're in the door business. Then they also do facades, they do outdoor, and in a recent move, they went into protection against flooding. I can understand the opportunity. In Luxembourg, we had a couple of major floods in the last years, but it is really diversifying. It has nothing to do, no synergies at all with the other businesses, right? It's something completely different. So, and this is on the product side, and then on the services side, actually, they do, so they sell these things, they install these things, they consult you on what to install, they do the repairs, and they also do the maintenance. This is actually something I worked on with them a couple of years ago, so it was an innovation for them that they have a subscription for the maintenance of everything that they install. So it's a small company, but these are different businesses that they are in. They are in the glass business, they are in the door business, they are in the accessory business, they are in the flooding protection business. This is corporate level decision, even for a small company. Here is another one, also Luxembourg company. They are even smaller. Nowadays, they are 50 people. They were also in the glass business, and they took a completely different strategy. So actually, they were in the glass business. They started off doing installations of third-party windows. And at some point, they went into innovating what they call minimal windows. So the concept of minimal windows is that you have large bays of windows, and the frame around the windows is really thin. So that's what they call minimal, so that you don't have big frames in big windows, but you can really see through the window, and your view is not obscured by these frames. And they have become a world leader when it comes to these minimal windows. So being able to produce them at really large sizes and still be very good when it comes to the thermal characteristics and the stability and the security of these windows, which apparently is difficult. Now, in the beginning, so they produced these windows, they did install these windows, and they still did install third-party windows, like Schüco as a famous example. And they did do that because these windows are quite expensive. So if you build a house, you might not have all of these windows across the house, but you might mix them. So some areas in the living room, for example, you have these minimal windows, but in your bedroom, you have the traditional windows. Then they made a strategic decision to say, well, instead of us buying these traditional windows from somebody else and then just installing them, let's do them ourselves. So they actually bought a manufacturer of these standard windows. And again, there was a corporate level decision. And remember, this is a company with only 50 people. Now they had a problem. And again, the problem was the positioning across these businesses. They wanted to align that, but it was not possible because the traditional windows, it's a commodity. You can buy them everywhere at good quality or different quality levels. So it's really difficult to differentiate there. On the other hand, they were known for these minimal windows, which is all about innovation. They are among the best in the world for these minimal windows. So you have two different positionings for these two different business units, right? And actually, so trying to run these two business units made so much trouble that they almost went bankrupt. And the strategic choice then was again made, the strategic decision was made, first of all, to sell off the standard windows and completely focus on these minimal ones. Also, very clear positioning here. We are innovative when it comes to windows. And actually, they stopped doing all the installation and maintenance and stuff. So they only concentrate on, we develop them, we sell them through partners, and that's it. Right? Before, actually, they used to fly around the world to install these windows all over the world. Right? They don't do that anymore. They work with distributors now in the countries who do that. Even here in Luxembourg, Luxembourg is quite small. They produce here, and they have a partner who does the distribution and installation of these windows. But corporate level decision on a small level, on a small company, really only 50 people, and making the wrong decisions here almost broke the company, and then they had to reverse these decisions, focus again, and now the company is flourishing again. So an example to show that, yeah, although it's called corporate, it's very, very relevant for small and medium companies. Good. Any questions about that? Any questions about anything we discussed today? We are nearing the hour, so we're almost done for today.
Question from me, Mark. In terms of accountability, to initiate the network level strategy and the business, I kind of assume so. In networks kind of strategy, is it the CEO that has to initiate that, or is it different level that need to initiate the different level of strategies?
Yeah, so as I said, I mean, it's a little bit network level strategy. It's a little bit, it can be in corporate, but it can also be in business. So there is a little bit, depends on where you're discussing it. Right? But as we said, so BMW made a decision not to partner with Tesla. That's probably a corporate level decision, and the business will not be able to go back to Tesla. And then obviously it depends on, so if you're doing corporate strategy, so usually that's the corporate company board or the C-suite that does that, and then you have business CEOs or presidents or VPs or SVPs, whatever, and that's where you discuss the business strategy on that level. Right? And again, as I said, if the corporate strategy is really about, we are looking for synergies, we are very tightly involved in the businesses, then you might have the two boards working together. In other companies, you say, well, the corporate board is really just doing corporate strategy, and they leave the business strategy to their businesses, and then it's discussed here. So in that sense, the decisions you're making on the corporate level on how you want to manage all these businesses is going to have an impact on who is going to be involved on the business level strategy discussions. So it was a complicated answer, right?
No, it was clear. Thank you. Sorry, I think you explained it before initially, but I just wasn't really sure. So thank you so much for your re-explanation.
Good. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? Stefan is thinking. So Stefan, you're part of the group, right?
What do you say? There's a discussion now in Germany with Lufthansa because it's a very current example. Yeah, like the major shareholder is now questioning if they have the right strategy, yes or no, or if it's too diffuse, if it's not concrete and clear enough. So I like that, and I'm currently thinking about other groups like how they leverage digital tech stacks, like the booking group, yeah, with different thinking, and there you can really see how different levels are closely interlinked and how strong it gets, because all the different layers are supporting each other, and you can't even copy it, but they work with customer thinking and with their technology skills. And I like that example in coming from travel industries, of course. Yeah, I like that a lot. And you see
That's
also
also a good example, sorry, for Lufthansa. In recent months, Lufthansa has consolidated everything that's the booking platform, right? So if you, no matter whether you use the Swiss app or the Lufthansa app or the Austrian Airlines app, the app always looks the same. It's just the colors that change, but you see that it's exactly the same platform, right?
Yeah.
So they have leveraged the resources here across these businesses, so they're looking for synergies there.
Yeah, that's good.
Same with the seats now. So the decision was made, the new seats that Ravi was talking about. So that's the hard product, they call it in the airline industry. It's going to be the same in Swiss, and it's going to be the same in Lufthansa. Again, colors change, but the seat configuration is going to be the same. So again, leveraging resources, leveraging positioning to some extent, because now you're going to have the same, at least hard product. Maybe the soft product, the service will still be a little bit different across the airlines, but the hard product at least will be the same. And that's a good example. And I was involved with Lufthansa like 10, 15 years ago, where we were consulting to the CIO at the time, and they were having these kind of discussions that they wanted to, the CIO wanted already at the time, leverage a common platform for booking, and the companies were resisting that.
Okay.
So on the corporate level, CIO wanted to have more synergies, but the businesses, they was too strong, and he couldn't manage to pull that through. And now they did it. So.
It's good.
Mark, it's Dr. Liebenberg here.
Hi.
Cobus Liebenberg. I have a question. Is that, obviously looking at what we're trying to do here is to create additional value and growth. Now, when you are, let's say, on the path of scaling your business and moving towards an IPO, how would the aggregate of these, let's say, strategic approaches work, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think, especially if you're going for an IPO, you want to have a clear strategy, right? If you have a clear strategy, you have a clear story that you can tell your investors. You want to have a strategy that works, right? So you need a good strategy, as we discussed earlier. And then it depends a little bit on what kind of level the IPO happens, right? I've been working recently with a company in Saudi Arabia, actually, where we did corporate strategy and business strategy, and now they do IPOs on the business level. And that was just part of the corporate strategy, that they're going to do IPOs on the business level. So it could be, IPOs obviously is part of your strategy, and then you need to have a good strategy, I would argue, so that your IPO makes more sense.
Yeah, I think ultimately the point is that there are multiple steps on your way to being to actually IPO. That is, if you IPO, and obviously there are various options or places, opportunities to exit, depending on what you want to do. So, but I think your explanation with regards to, obviously being very clear about, in your pitch deck to your investors in terms of what you're trying to do and where you're currently at in terms of your business growth and scale is obviously two key considerations, right?
Yeah, the other point you're alluding to is that you could have different strategies on how to do an IPO, right? So that's
exactly
different discussion. Yeah. Any other comments, questions?
Yeah, building up on Coco's comments, IPO, maybe it's not a strategic target. It could be also a way of financing your business, because you find out that you want to have this financing source. So that's one key. For entrepreneurs nowadays, like startup founders, they always cry for IPO because on the private side, they want to become a millionaire. So that's a different story. But for large or medium-sized corporations, I think the IPO is maybe sometimes the only feasible option then when you want to finance your business. And once you are publicly listed, you need to have this prospect to be listed. And afterwards, you're under attack and challenge. So that also keeps your strategy up to date, I think, because within the prospect to pitch in the pitch deck, and also afterwards, you need to be very up to date. So you can't really relax. the advantage and disadvantages of being publicly listed.
Yeah, no, you're quite right, Stefan. And the extent to which you actually have available cash.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's also, again, at corporate level, if you have multiple businesses you want to sell off, this divesting, it's a corporate level strategy discussion also, right?
Yeah.
Like I said, Danfoss, so they had standalone businesses where we worked a year to have a good strategy in the business, and the objective was clearly, we need to have a good strategy, and then we want to sell the business. Because it no longer fits within our portfolio. Right? Yeah. And then, so they sold it to a private company, but you could just as well have done an IPO. Right? So,
yeah, I think the idea is obviously to just constantly manage and review your network, review your strategy, in order to have options, whether you exit or whether you proceed to IPO, or whether you actually, whatever you decide to do, retire, whatever the case might be, exit.
That's something we're going to discuss tomorrow.
Is just to be, constantly have this updated planning and effective, let's say, set of goals that you're working towards, and evaluate that relative to the changes in your ecosystem or in your particular market. Yeah. Thank you. You've answered the question.
I think Varsha or Angel had a question.
Yeah, I would like to come back to the question of the challenges, because I think I mostly find everything very interesting. It's very much in line with my way of thinking. So thanks for this clear, exposition. The question of the challenges for me is relevant because one thing that many times happens is that there is kind of myopia or blindness to the regarding to the reality a company is living. So if you have not the ability to identify what are the real challenges, and this is one of the big risks I've experienced in some companies I've been working. You will never identify good strategies because one thing is you can think about strategies, some generic, which could be necessary, but the strategies changing the game have to be addressing clear challenges of any nature. So the question is, I do see many, let's say, not clear understanding of the real situation in many managers. So I would like to speak about this subject, about how to identify the real challenges, how to deeply understand the situation.
Right. I mean, as I said, so there is obviously every company has its own challenges. What I'm presenting here is kind of like the starting point, right? And as I call them, the foundational challenges that every company needs to solve, the foundational questions that every company needs to ask and answer on these different levels. Because very often, so I think strategy, what type of strategy, let's say you do, also depends on your starting point. Very often, like the media company I showed you before, they didn't really have a clear strategy. They had no clear idea about what is our ambition, who is our ideal customer, what should we actually be offering them. So they were very proud of their entrepreneurial culture, but the entrepreneurial culture had led them to doing everything. And they didn't even know whether what they were doing was profitable or not. Right? So that is kind of a situation where you say, well, the challenge is now we need to develop a strategy and have clear answers to these strategic questions. Who is the customer? How are we going to win? How are we going to do it? Once that is clear, you move kind of to the second level, which is more the Netflix. So Netflix has very clear about where to play, how to win. But along the way, they faced challenges and they needed to adapt their strategy and fine-tune their strategy to solving these challenges, but the ambition still stays the same, right?
But
so
just that's clear. But when, for example, when the challenge is to survive or to significantly change the business.
Yes, but then if you change the business, you still need to answer. We're going to, I guess, more about the business level strategy, but then you have questions that you need to change here. how are we going to change into what, right? And the questions you have to ask yourself are the same, but then you come up with different and new answers.
Yeah.
In terms of how you do business, where to play, how to win, all these things, right? That we're going to discuss tomorrow.
Okay. Let's see.
Tomorrow we're going to do business strategy and functional strategy.
Okay.
So I can still stay on. I just want to wrap it up for those who have to leave because we are at the hour. So if you want to stay on and you have some questions, I'm here. So congratulations. That was the first day that we completed. If you have time either tonight or tomorrow morning, I ask you to just take 5 minutes to think about your ambition. I mean, we talked a little bit about it before. I showed you some results of what is possible if you have a good strategy. Also, really think a little bit about, for your company, your position, what would be kind of a dream result if you zoom out to the future? We're going to come back to that tomorrow. And tomorrow we're going to discuss business level strategy, functional level strategy, and also strategy process. Also, what are the steps that you should be going through? And I think for most of you, business level strategy is actually going to be the most relevant. So make sure to show up, and you don't want to miss that. Okay, so those who have to leave, thank you for being here today, and see you tomorrow. And again, those who want to stay on, if you have still some questions, I'm happy to stay on a couple of hours. Otherwise, see you tomorrow.
Thank you all. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Many thanks.
Thanks. Thank you, Mark. Take care. Bye.
Mark, thank you very much, Mark. See you tomorrow.
Thank you, Raj.
Take care.